Hello, dear friends, and welcome back. This is actually uh, uh, us coming back into a promise that we made at the end of a presentation by our dear friend Julio, the presentation on evolution, primordial emotions, and spiritual journey, given at the SSB this past Saturday, September 14th, 2024. The promise was that we would take the questions that we could not answer at the SSB after the presentation and collect them all together, put them all together, and have our dear friend Julio answer them here for us. And here we are, giving thanks to our dear friend Julio to answer these questions, take the time to uh, bring the enlightenments to the questions that we have put together. Some of them I'm quite excited to ask Julio and have the answer and bring it to us the what is in that pertains to the message that he brought on Saturday. Nonetheless, I would like to remind everyone to please, take the time to watch it again, or if you did not watch it, watch the presentation and really send more questions, and we'll try to answer again. Have Julio answer them also. But we have quite a few of them. We would like to get to it. And welcome back again, Julio, to this moment. And I remember the SSB when I came in, I kind of whispered to you this proposal, right? And everybody was like, "What are they whispering about?" But obviously we
That's
told
right.
them, and everybody was like, talking about fear and whatnot. But we have some interesting questions. Would you like to say anything before we start with these questions, Julio?
No, actually, just to thank for having me back here to talk about this topic. I like it very much. And we can go for the questions.
All
And
right.
hello to everyone there
No
as
fear,
well.
right?
No, hopefully, no fear. And hopefully, no hatred back.
No, exactly. No hatred back. Yes,
Just love.
just love. That's awesome. Well, question number one:
Mhm.
how do the experiences lived in the monad stage reflect on the future spirit and its evolution as an essence associated to a human body?
Okay. So, a lot of us have a tendency to get a little stuck with the word monad. So, let us call it pre spirit. I mean, the name will not change anything, right? A rose by any other name would
Mhm.
smell as sweet. So let's call it pre spirit. Being pre spirit, whatever the monad is learning in its journey, and learning here I'm using in a very loose way, because the idea of knowledge and learning, the way we define these things, is more for us, for human beings, for spirits who have now an intelligence well developed, and so on and so forth. But let us still use these words. So, whatever the monad learns in its journey is part of its database, it's part of its foundation, and it will be carrying to the next reincarnation as a monad or as a pre spirit, and on and on and on. And eventually, we'll have accumulated enough of these experiences, of this knowledge, of everything that is being learned throughout the process during the monad stage or during the pre spirit stage. And then eventually we'll have enough to be a spirit. And being a spirit means that we'll be associated not anymore to the bodies of animals or the bodies of plants or the bodies of microorganisms, but we'll be associating ourselves with the physical body of a human being. So we are not human beings in the sense that this body is not what defines us. We are spirits. When we reach this stage, we have had a long journey as pre spirits or monads. And as we discussed in the lecture, we had about 3.8 billion years as a monad or pre spirit before we could become a spirit. So, just to give an idea, as spirits, as a being associated to the physical body of a human being, we've only been doing this for 2.58 million years. That's one roughly 1/2000th of the time we have been a pre-spirit or a monad. So we're just building up to get to this. If we don't build up as a pre-spirit or monad, we don't get to this level, because this is not the first rung on a ladder. This is a rung all the way at the top. We have to take each one of the rungs in order to climb the ladder.
Very well, thank you. Quite bit of time, correct, and still not enough to um, evolve as some of us may think that we are. But
Yes.
question number two, the person who asked said, "I understand the human physical body, although very evolved in its complexity, is highly vulnerable to simple entities like viruses and bacteria, resulting in diseases and fatality." So here comes the question. In the triad system, sensors, processors, and effectors, what of those would be more likely to account for this vulnerability?
Okay. So just for us to recap what we discussed during the lecture, the sensors are any structure all the way from the molecular level to many, many cells that form an organ, like our eyes, for instance.
Mhm.
A sensor is what detects what is outside, sends that information somewhere inside. I'm saying somewhere. There is a specific place, but the place will be different for each animal, each plant, each microorganism. This is why I'm going to say it very generally, somewhere. In this somewhere inside of us, okay, there will be a processing center, the processor. The processor not only receives this information, this stimulus from the outside, but it will be doing something with it. It will be deciding what it is, for instance. Is it food? Is it a toxicant? Is it going to make me sick? Is it going to make me stronger? And so on and so forth. This is the processing center. But the center that processes this information cannot do anything. So we need the effector. The effector can be something very simple as something much more complex, like the legs we have to move towards food or away from danger. So this is the triad we discussed: sensors, processing center, and effectors. The processing center in our bodies as human beings is the brain, that central one. But we also have our the spinal cord and all the nerves. So which one of the three, if any, is the most important? Well, the physical body is vulnerable. That is true. It's vulnerable to diseases, it's vulnerable to many things that are even physical. We can break an arm and not necessarily have a disease. It's a medical condition as opposed to a disease. There's no microorganism there, as opposed to an infection, for instance. But we can also have a bone that breaks and an infection. So we can have both happening at the same time. But whether it's one or the other, here what we want to convey is the part that each one of these three of the triad play. The sensors don't do anything. So they just sense the establishment, they sense the environment, they sense the surroundings, right? So they can, for instance, alert us to a danger, but the sensor itself cannot do anything. The effector itself also cannot do anything, even though, for instance, it's the effector, let's say the muscles and the bones in my arms that allow me to move my finger from the flame of a candle so that I don't burn the tip of my fingers. But I can only do that if I have some form of a processing center. So some of this processing happens at the central processing unit, our brains. And some during our evolution, because we didn't start with the brain, we started with very simple processors. They are called arc reflexes, and in us today, they don't even go to our brains. They are processed at the level of our spinal cord. So it is the processing unit, the processors, that assist us in trying to keep our health. Why is that? Because it's through the processor that we are going to evaluate situations, that we are going to process the information. So, for instance, I get into a discussion with someone, a very ugly discussion. By processing the information, seeing how alterated the individual is, how loud the individual has become, sometimes how profane, how vulgar. Why should I engage this individual? So it is a form of thinking before reacting. Before we get to the human form, we react only. We don't have a lot of, as we said before during the lecture, we are putting a very sharp divide between humans and everything else. There is a continuum there, but let us imagine the divide being very, very sharp. So before being human, we only react. We are basically instinctive, or we have arc reflexes. Arc reflex is that thing that allows us to pull our hands or our whole arm away from the flame, for instance. Or when a doctor hits our patella in our knees and we jerk our lower leg. But we need to process information. So see, if I process all of this, I see the person and in his or her altered state, the profanity or the vulgarity. This is not a situation that is conducive to a conversation. I will not be able to engage this individual in a constructive way. So we will just move away from it. But it's the processing center that tells me that. So this is also valid for everything else in life. The processing center is what is going to decide. It's where I, as a spirit, have a control of the physicality. I, as Julio's spirit, I interact with the processing center. And then with the processing center, I send a physical command to the effector to say, move away from it or move towards it if it's something that I find useful, constructive, and so on. So health is related to this central processing because it's through the central processing that we are attached spiritually to the physical body, through the centers of energy, for instance.
Very interesting explanation, Julio. Thank you so much. And question number three is as interesting as these past two, I guess all of them are. And the question is Jesus was immune to infections, to any disease. Was his pure love responsible to shield one or all components of the triad system from the pathological attack? Conversely, how do fear and hatred that we all still feel imbalance this system?
Okay, so let us start with the first one about our Master Jesus Christ. So let us make a distinction here. Christ is the spirit, Jesus is the human being. Right? So Jesus is the one that we are talking about not getting sick. And it's absolutely correct. Because imagine a spirit of the level of Christ. Imagine the control that that spirit had over the central processing unit of the human being, Jesus. So Jesus avoided scandals. Jesus avoided situations that were embarrassing, that were profane, that were vulgar, that were non-constructive in plain and simple English and very general as well. So by doing that, Jesus promoted his own well-being. He was his own well-being. He did not have to wait for the environment to provide it to him or for him. Um, so this is what we need to learn. This is what Spiritism is trying to teach us. When we say that we can heal ourselves, when we say we can do much more than we think we can, that we can move mountains, it's through this sense. But this means that we spirits, or even all the way back to essence, we must improve ourselves to such a degree that we understand more of what our surroundings are offering us and we make better choices, healthier choices. Healthier choices here is not eating vegetables and fruits as opposed to this, that, and the other. No, it's everything, even sometimes having, not sometimes, even conversations that we have at work, in the family, in the office, you name, at school, because there are conversations that only lead us to a form of an ulcer, a gastritis. It will start as a gastritis, will start as an irritation in our stomachs because we're going to be so livid, so upset, so irritated that eventually, if repeated and repeated often enough, will lead us from a simple discomfort to a gastritis, and from that gastritis later on even an ulcer, right? So this is where the spirit has a much better control of the human body, of the physicality. And it does that through the centers of energy, and goes and affects primarily the center of energy that is called the coronal center of energy, the one that is at the top, that also connects to all the other centers of energy. The centers of energy are physical, but they are under the command of the spirit. So they are the processing units for our body, particularly, principally, the center, the coronal center of energy, the one at the very top, because it's from there that we distribute that energy that flows from the spirituality through everything else in our bodies. Unless we learn how to change ourselves in our nature, which is the spirit or the essence, I should even say, we will not be able to change the body, because the body, we can put makeup on, we can change a lot of things, we're still the same person. We have to change all the way there in our innermost nature. This is what Jesus knew, and this is why he could live in a time where diseases and medical conditions were rampant, and he was absolutely healthy. But notice that Jesus, as the human being, bled, felt pain, everything. The human body behaved like every other human body. The difference was the control of that human body. The control comes from the spirituality, and it's there that we need to focus. It's at that point that we need to focus our attention. So that describes the part of the question about Jesus. The second part, I was a little clear. Are we talking about which one of the love or hatred or fear? Which one of them?
So the question is, conversely, how do fear and hatred that we all still feel imbalance this system? It brings back to us.
Oh, okay. Well, fear will always be present. Fear will always be with us. We will not be able to get rid of fear. But there are different types of fear. There is a fear, let us call it basic. That is the one we will never be able to um, get rid of. And the reason is very simple. We have a physical body. Notice we say we have a physical body. We are the essence. We have a spiritual body. And then when we are reincarnated, we have a physical body as well. And no one wants to die. No one wants to die. It doesn't matter, oh, do I fear death because of this? No, we just don't want to die. So, in that sense, very, very basically, very, very primordially, we are afraid of that passage. That is the most basic type of fear. And because we have a physical body or a spiritual body, that fear never goes away. But we now talk about fears that are or can become pathological. Let me give you an example. Let us say that we have a particular test, examination. It's an examination at work, it's an examination to change jobs, it's an interview. It is actually healthy to be anxious, to feel a little bit of butterflies in our stomach, for instance, because that puts us in a situation of alertness. We focus our minds towards that goal because it is important to us. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing it in the first place. So that little bit of sudorisis, the sweaty palms and that little bit of a palpitation, that is fine. That is fine. But when it becomes too much, that's pathological. And that's the fear that not only will preclude us from doing well in an interview or in an examination, it's not only that, but it can even lead to other things that are going to be psychosomatic. We can have an ulcer, we can have dyspepsia, we can have so many different diseases that will begin very mildly. And if repeated often enough, can lead to certain things that are much more complicated and serious. So when is it that it becomes pathological? It's very simple, but it varies from individual to individual. It's when it paralyzes us. The moment that I cannot do well in an interview, the moment, and well is not what I think, the moment that I cannot even not even open my mouth, or that I say the words but I stumble upon them, and I cannot coordinate my thoughts, or I cannot even write a sentence if it's a written examination, that is when it's pathological. It's too much. And we have to address this with therapy, for instance, or with counseling. But some way it has to be, in some way or another, has to be addressed, because if not, it will become something psychosomatic, and it will become a disease or a medical condition later on. So Jesus had such a control, just to go back and kind of tie it up with the first part of the question, such a control that he never even got to the point of allowing anything to paralyze him. He faced mobs, large crowds that became mobs. He faced everything during the Calvary, during all the everything that he had to endure, with always with that serenity of mind. This is the level of control that he had as a spirit, and imparting that control to the physicality, to the body. So Christ had the control and imparted that control through the coronal center of energy to the physical body of Jesus. He still experienced pain. He still, if he cried, he meant it, he bled, everything that is physiological part of the human body, Jesus manifested, but always under us as let's say an aura of serenity, because that comes from the spirit, that comes from Christ, not from Jesus itself.
Thank you, Julio. Very well. It's amazing how with these two questions and the answers that you brought, it brings us to the sense of responsibility over with the processors, right? How we process things that we have towards our emotions, right? What we feel, what we the effectors. Because if we were to blame the sensor or the effectors, um, there is no responsibility, if you will. Yeah.
Exactly. Actually, there are a few passages in the Book of Hope by brothers Emmanuel and Francisco Xavier, where they say blaming our physical bodies for something we have done, we the essence, is like blaming a horse that is not being guided properly by the conductor of the carriage.
Yeah. Yeah. Very
So
well.
we are actually making this physical body move. It does not move on its own. It moves because we, the essence behind, we tell it do this, that, and the other. So to blame the physical body, it's just a very let's say a very lame excuse, basically. And there's another beautiful passage from the Gospel according to Spiritism, where they say that a serene spirit, even in the body of a giant, a muscular person, a person that at first may appear so big that it intimidates others, it will still be a gentle individual. So we say it's a gentle giant. And one that is very bellicose, very warlike, individual, even if you put that individual that individual is associated to a physical body that is, let's say, that has many handicaps, it will still be a very aggressive individual, because the spirit behind is aggressive, not the body. It's the spirit. The control comes from the spirit, the essence. And this is what is imparted to the physicality. Whether the physicality is limited by a handicap or another is immaterial. It will still be aggressive, bellicose, warlike. It will still be destructive, or at least non-constructive.
Very well. Thank you. Moving along, we have several
Good.
more.
Mhm.
This is, I believe, in relation to finding out where instinct lies on this whole thing. So the question is instinct closer to reason or emotion?
Okay. Oh, I remember someone was discussing that with me at the end. It was a somewhat similar question. So it's an amazing question, but I I hope I know the person that actually wrote the question, or said the question, doesn't mind me saying this. In the question, there is already some fallacy. There's a flaw. So let us separate things a little bit. The emotion, okay, and the instinct, and we have to put them aside for a second. What we have before we associate ourselves to human bodies is in part instinct. Not everything before is going to have an instinct. Certain things will not have an instinct. Bacteria do not have instinct. Okay, for instance, we are going to use the word instinct for animals in particular. Plants also don't have instincts. What they have is arc reflexes. They don't think. They don't have a central processing unit as evolved as the one in animals, and definitely not as evolved as the one in human beings. By the time we get to the animals, we do have the instinct. But in order for us to have an emotion, what we have to have is a central processing unit. So the spinal cord, for instance, in this case for us, which is a secondary processor, doesn't count. It has to be the brain. It has to be particularly the outer the cortical area of our brain. And that is the area that is the most developed in humans in comparison to everything else. This is the part that reasons. This is the part that makes choices and then decides which one to take, which avenue to take. Choices are not presented to us. We create them for ourselves. So this is the part that is the intelligence. So again, we are using that very straight, very strict divide between humans and all the other animals. And we know that there is a little bit of a gradation there, of course, but again, to learn, to be able to study for the first time, we have to put certain limitations. So, in order for us to have an emotion, this is what we presented. Emotions are the result of intelligence. So, in other words, in order to have instinct, we still have our instincts, because we're still animals. We don't lose what we acquired with all these billions of years of evolution. We just keep adding to our repertoire. We just have a much larger repertoire. But today, not only we have a larger repertoire than most animals, and definitely from animals and most plants as well, but our repertoire also has certain things that make us far from all of them. That's the intelligence. But we still have the instinct in us. So when the animals are processing information, they are going to be processing information instinctively primarily. And there is, like I said, there's a gradation. So there is a beginning of an intelligence there, but not compared to ours. And then when we have the processing of these stimuli that come from the surroundings, and we decide on something, that is when we create the emotions. Emotions are intelligent creations. There are creations of intelligence, You cannot have emotions without intelligence. So if we think about animals, again, with that very, very strict divide, animals do not hate. Animals do not fear either. They have instinct, but they don't fear. So animals, when they kill one another, when they are trying to eat one another, they don't do that because they hate the other. They kill out of the instinct of out of the not the out of a sense of self-preservation, because they want nourishment. You don't see an animal killing another and storing the excess of the kill for the next day, or then for a few hours. They kill, they eat, and they move on. So the animals are not going to present or manifest fear or um, manifest hatred, and definitely they don't manifest love, not at the level that we do, because they don't have the intelligence to create these emotions. It is one other thing that is important to say about the animals is that we have a tendency to, oh, but this animal, look how cute it is, or it's doing this. We have a tendency to anthropomorphize the animal behavior. What is that? Anthropo, human, morphize, give the form of. So we give the animal's behavior a form, or we associate with a form of our way of thinking, but the animal is not thinking.
Mm.
And this is where we have to separate. Now we might say something about that gray area that I said we always have a very strict division. Of course, when we talk about cats, particularly, and dogs, especially cats and dogs, because they have been domesticated for so many thousands of years, they are learning from us. They can express at the very beginnings the prodromes of emotions, because they also have a little bit of that intelligence. And other animals as well, large mammals such as elephants, for instance, and dolphins and whales. But it's definitely not with the processing power that we have.
Very interesting. Thank you, Julio. And this leads actually to the next question. So, may we consider emotions consequences of choices?
Emotions can be considered in some cases, yes, consequences of our choices. But we have to be very careful with the way we phrase it. It doesn't mean that emotions are um, emotions happen because the choice comes from outside, and therefore they are brought into existence. No. Remember when I said before that we create the choices and then we create the decisions about the choices?
Mm-hmm.
It is under that umbrella. So I create a few choices, and the moment that I choose one or the other, I will create an emotion related to
Mm-hmm.
it. So I'm still the one responsible. I'm still the one that originates it,
Right.
and the one responsible for it and for the consequences of it. Because if we were to assume for 1 second that the emotions could be created by outside choices given to us by one way or another, doesn't matter, but given to us, then I would have no responsibility. I would be able to find a loophole that will give me no responsibility for my actions further downstream. So it cannot be. And we know that we are the ones that create the choices, and then we are the ones that create a decision about the choices.
At the end of the day, we still have to process it. So if we are processing, right, the end result is our responsibility.
Yes.
Very well. Thank you. Question number 6. Why is it we continue to fear as errant spirits if we know that the spirit does not die? Goes back to the fear.
Sure. No, no. Go back to the first emotion, the most primitive, right? The primordial emotion. So we discussed about that two types of fear, the very basic one, the basal or the foundation of the emotion, which is the fear of dying, or fear of expiring, the fear of no longer existing, right? So we're putting aside here the ability to think whether we have a continuation of our lives later on. There is a fear, that is residual fear about that. Even the ones, the great ones, right? I think it was St. Peter that used to say that um, we are always dying. We stop dying the moment we die, right? Because when we live, we are always dying. So all of these are philosophical, and and they are very true. But let us think about it. Even those individuals, there is that anxiety. You must, oh, but then it's anxiety. But what is anxiety if not fear? We have a lot of different terms that in the end, when you get and you crunch them to the essence of what they mean, they go back to fear, hatred, or love. Hatred, for instance, can be anger. Hatred can also be despise, right? So same thing for fear. So this little anxiety for the passage back, because we know the physicality. Even those of us who believe in reincarnation, believe in the spiritual world, believe that the spiritual world is our homeland, and this is only a temporary travel land, right? We have that little anxiety about that moment. Am I going to suffer? Is it going to be painful? Am I going to be sleeping for too long? And this and that. So all of these tiny little things, they're not pathological. Most of us who study, who try to have this idea ingrained in us, but it's still there. That is the basal fear. This fear is for the physical body. But then what happens when we go back into the spiritual realm? Well, actually, we double it, because we also have that little thing that, oh my God, I don't want to go back to the physical realm. It's so nice here, so cozy here. Everybody's so nice to me. Everybody's always smiles. So we have the fear of returning to a reincarnation process. Number one. But even if we did not have that, even if we did not have that, the moment that we have, oh, look at the verbs, have. The moment that we have a body, physical or spiritual, there is that anxiety. Now, for a high order spirit that have evolved so much more, right? And not even need, that doesn't even need to reincarnate anymore, still has that spiritual body. That spiritual body is material. So there
And
has to be a residual fear.
I'm glad that you're covering this, Julie, because at the beginning of the answer, you were covering with the question, we were covering the physicality, right? Leo in the physical body, the fear of dying, right? Of losing the physical body, the in a way, an extension of the law of preservation, right? And yes, I mean, now you address the idea of the spiritual world. Since we know that we're going to live forever. The body will cease to exist, but the essence, will continue on. We still have this fear, right? We still have this this feeling that we haven't yet mastered on how to, or developed in a way that we cannot master yet.
We can also
Interesting.
see it from another point of view. When we are here reincarnated, we can think of the fear as physiological, right? The fear of losing the physicality. But then when we go back to the spiritual realm, we are still material. The spiritual body is material. Whether it's very well evolved or not, it doesn't matter. There's still a material body, right? So we can think of also physiological fear, because that is a material body, period.
Mhm.
But there's also another one. Imagine that you are a spirit of a certain level of or degree of evolution, moral and intellectual. You may have the fear of not applying yourself enough to continue evolving. This fear is more refined, right? It's not a fear about losing something material or physical in the physicality, but it's something about not coping or not being able to cope with the challenges in life. But that is a fear as well. So that fear is part, but primarily we talk about the physiological, purely physiological for physical bodies, and spiritual physiological for the spiritual body, but
Very
still
well.
exists.
Thank you. Thank you. Moving on, because of time, we are now, well, jump to number 7 because actually we are, we already addressed it. So the next question is, why is hatred, now moving to hatred, permitted not only here, but also in the spiritual realm?
Because when we talk about emotions, we have a problem. We don't want to admit to ourselves that these emotions are coming from us. Actually, even to say that they come from us is incorrect. They are us. They are manifestations of ourselves. When I fear, or when I hate, or when I love, it doesn't matter. It is my essence, it's Julio essence manifesting itself. This manifestation is carried out by the Julio spirit,
Mhm.
and that Julio spirit, in this case, because I'm reincarnated, carries it out to Julio physical body. So when the physical body manifests hate, when the physical body manifests love or manifests fear, it's nothing more than the manifestation that came all the way from the essence. We are hatred. We are love. Of course, in different scenarios, in different
Mhm.
situations, not always all the time. And we are love. So in that in that view, it happens because that's what we are. If we exist, the only way is to prove that we exist to ourselves is to manifest ourselves. And in doing so, the moment that we manifest fear, the moment that we manifest hatred or love, that's it. So there is no point in having any form of spiritual police that will say, no, you cannot do this, there. No, because otherwise, how would we grow? If these three are manifestations of our intelligence, which ultimately is the manifestation of the essence, right? The intelligence is the essence. It's one and the same thing. We don't say the essence has intelligence. The essence cannot have anything. It's essence. The essence is A, B, C, or whatever it is, but it is that thing. So the essence is the intelligence, and is being the intelligence manifests it this way, that way, hatred, fear, love. So it has to manifest because otherwise we wouldn't progress. We'll move from fear to hatred and eventually to love. And who knows if there's another thing after love? We don't know. We already have problems with these three, so let us stay with these three. That's enough on our plate right now.
Very well. Very well. Thank you so much, Julio. Couple more because of time. We have to move up a little bit faster. So the next one is, when do we stop having fear? The same question for hatred and for love, respectively and separately.
Okay, so let's start with fear because it's the easiest one. Never. As long as we have a physicality or a spiritual body, as long as we have a body, there is an inkling, there is a remnant of fear. Of course, the more we evolve, the more we learn, the more refined this fear becomes, and or more ethereal or not as pronounced. Remember what we did when we defined fear. Fear is nothing more than the difference between the stimuli that we collect from the outside, our surroundings, our environment, that is what is next to us or even far away, but what is outside of us. So it's the difference between all these stimuli that we collect from the surroundings and our level of understanding of them. The more we understand, okay, the lower the gap between our ignorance and our stimuli, and the lower the fear. So this is why the high order spirits will have a residual fear that will not paralyze them, but it's there. That fear may even be somewhat confused eventually, confused because it's really not the same thing as the like a sense of self-preservation. It's no longer a sense of self-preservation. It's still an emotion, but there is a residual of it because, like I said, they still have a spiritual body. They are still going through changes. So this is for fear. For hatred, we define hatred as that fear that is run has run out of control and that has been fulfilled by manifestations of the ego. So the moment that we begin to manifest the self in us, right? It's not that we have an ego and that we have a self. It's the way we divide our manifestations, our psychological manifestations. But imagine that they are like two fighters sparring against one another. As the self appears on in the late in the game, right? And a funny thing, because it's the ego that generates the self. The ego generates its own enemy to a certain degree, because not really an enemy, but something that operates usually in the opposite direction. Usually, not always, but as a rule, they are sparring with one another. So as the self is brought into existence by the very manifestations of the ego, the excessive manifestations of the ego, they begin sparring with one another, and eventually the self, and this we learned from Joanna de Angelis, the collection, particularly of the psychology of the psychology collection, right? As they begin to spar with one another and the self improves itself, the self becomes stronger, right? They reach a balance. The self does not beat up the other, the ego. Not and neither does the ego beat the self. They find an equilibrium, a balance. When this self ego axis becomes balanced, hatred ceases to exist. So, and then it doesn't matter. Now, think about it. When we think of Jesus, right? Jesus was the product of the Spirit Christ. Christ had the ego self perfect balance. So it imparted upon the physicality. We have to remember, we have to change all the way up there at the essence, at the very beginning. And once you do it in the essence, you become self loving and a loving individual. And if you become a self loving and loving individual, everything else, your spiritual body will reflect that because it's deterministic. Whatever the essence is, the physical body has. So then it becomes that, and then whatever the spiritual body has manifests through towards the physical body. When, of course, there is a person, the essence is reincarnated. So that's number two. Number three, love. Well, love is the manifestation of the perfect balance between the two, right? So in answering for hatred, we kind of gave it away for love. So when we have an imbalance, we have hatred. When we don't have an imbalance, it's perfectly aligned. It's a boring seesaw, as I call it, because it's a seesaw that never moves to one side or the other, never tips to one side or the other. When it becomes a boring seesaw, actually, that's when life becomes very worth living. That's when, in the sense of in a community, because then we live with respect for one another. So when that seesaw is not moving anymore, basically just wiggle a little bit, that's when we are love. We manifest love. We are love at the essence, and we manifest love through our spiritual body and the physical body.
It's interesting that you use this analogy of the seesaw, and I believe that based on what you're saying, the moment that we were trying to find balance, them, in between the two sides, that's already an expression of love, right?
Yes.
That's you're trying to balance. Wait a minute, and I'm not gonna let these two parts of fight the ego, right?
Hmm.
Over it's just amazing. That's a really interesting way to put it. Thank you. And we would like to finalize with love. All right.
Okay.
Would not love become instinctive in higher order spirits?
Well, let us see by the way we define things, right? Then wouldn't that be making love go backwards if it becomes an instinct? Love has to be reasoned. All the emotions, they have to be reasoned. Because if love becomes instinctive, if love becomes an instinct, what merit is there in loving? What effort have we made when we love something? It cannot be instinctive. It cannot become an instinct. But we may say something different. We may say that love becomes second nature. In other words, this is the individual when you approach an individual who does something beautiful that everyone around admires, right? And then that we go to the person and we say, "Why did you do it that way? Nobody does it that way." And we expect the person to say, "Oh, because I thought about this." But it has become second nature that the individual says to you, back to us, "Well, I just didn't, I couldn't think of any other way to behave." So it's not instinctive because you notice I could not think of any other way to behave. You're still thinking. It's still a reasoned situation, a rationalized situation. We don't like to put two words together, love and rationalization, because we think that one is no rationalization is cold and stoical and isolationist, and love is all that. No, love
Mm.
has, we have to choose to love. In the same way, choose, we have to choose to hate. We don't choose to fear because, like I said, if you have a physical body or a spiritual body, you have that amount of residual fear that you don't choose. It's built in. That is built in. It's not instinctive, but it's built in. But we choose to love as well as we choose to hate, which is why we have, basically, well, we can redeem ourselves because if I can choose to hate and I can choose to love, it's about choosing the right one, but
Wonderful.
never instinctive. Never, never instinctive. Second nature, if we want to say something, yes, like I gave this example of someone who does something so out of this world that we expect the person to be able to come up with a very beautiful explanation, which is no, I just could not think of anything else to do. That's second nature. And when you reach that situation, there's no turning back. You will always be loving.
Very well. Julio, thank you so much.
My
I have to
pleasure.
say, it sparked many other questions on me, but we'll leave that for the second part that we will have hopefully at the SSP, as Kirsten proposed to have, and Paula as well proposed to have the second part of this, and we're excited to
Oh
schedule that
yes.
day, so that we can go ahead and bring you back, and so we can continue to discuss these
When these
feelings.
emotions are treated from the pathological point of view, yes,
Right.
as opposed to just a general manifestation of these emotions, yes.
And I think the what I would like to say, and to finalize, so we can finalize, I'll pass the word back to you so you can say your final words here. But it's the responsibility that we have to start treating ourselves much better, right? Consequently, this will reverberate, or this will also inundate the environment where we are in, and help others to do the same, right? And will this will also um, uh, help us see others in a different way, in more humane way, more um, bring equilibrium to our lives, right? When we talk about this, how we process things, these feelings that we have, and the responsibility consequently is just a beautiful thing in our day-to-day lives. So thank you again. I'll pass the word to you to say your final words, and we bid ourselves farewell.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for having me here again. What I would say is this: we were put together by the breath of the Creator. We were willed into existence by something so great we still cannot fathom. We still cannot have words to describe. We don't even understand. But what I can we can do is we can investigate this, the physicality, at
Mhm.
least the physicality. And we are driving an amazing machinery. We are associated to an amazing machinery. If we could see inside of ourselves, just physically, how the brain works, whatever it is that we understand today, how much time it took 3.8 billion years to reach this level, we would be able to see how wonderful we are at the essence, and we have how many beautiful things we have in terms of an instrument, of a tool that we have now, whether it's the spiritual body or the physical body, because the spiritual body is actually a better copy of our physical body. Doesn't have the genetic limitations, it doesn't have a lot of other limitations that come with the reincarnation process. So it's even a better version of what we have here. So just look at yourself, just respect yourself a little more. And respecting yourself is not at the expense of the other, because sometimes this is what we think, right? That we are just going to give ourselves privileges, and that is self-love. That's not self-love. That is actually self being very selfish. So just think of that. Think that we are put together, willed into existence by a creator, and that we have now this amazing machinery to manifest ourselves. And in manifesting, we can polish ourselves to something much better, a much better future for ourselves and for all of those around us whom we already know how to love, and whom we already know how to choose to love. So that's it.
Thank you so much, Julio. Again, dear friends, thanks for sharing this moment with us as well. We hope you like it. And if you have more questions, let us know. Julie will be here to answer them. And we'll propose another time to Julio so we can meet again and answer these questions. Hope to see you soon, either the SSB or through our videos and all the work that we put together to enlighten our lives together. Thank you.
Thank you.